Chapter 61, Cultivating Qi to the 7th Level. Translator. 549,690,339. Vast cloud sea, whistling surge in an instant. The main peak obscured by the mist reveals its full glory, resembling a fairyland. Then, the spirit light flickers, veiling the fairyland, leaving only a corner of the main peak still clearly visible. An immortal boat hovers at the edge of the main peak. Upon it, a cultivator rises into the sky, waving his hand, causing the immortal boat to emit a purple glow that shines on a platform at the edge of the main peak. Whoosh! Over 100 people appear on the platform. This is the teleportation function of the immortal boat. A treasure-ranked immortal boat possesses the space-shifting ability. Han Yi had once seen it on the sect's large transport treasure, the sky-flying divine ship. He attentively watches, raising his eyebrows slightly. Such intense killing aura. At this moment, there are more than 100 disciples who landed in the corner of the main peak. Their surroundings are enveloped in a violent killing intent, stirring the mist. Even through the illusion fairy mirror, Han Yi can feel the overbearing killing aura charging towards him. If it were face to face, Han Yi might not even be able to move at this moment. The intensity of the killing aura, in a sense, reflects one's combat and killing capability. How strong! Han Yi's inner heart is astonished. It's worthy of the cave heaven trial. At least in terms of killing and bloodthirsty aura, they should have gained quite a harvest. It's not like Han Yi hasn't seen inner peak 9th layer disciples before. When he went to Tianqing City, there were 3 with him. He occasionally encountered them in and out of the inner peak, but none of the Qi cultivation 9th layer disciples he met had such an intense killing aura. At this moment, on Little Lingshu Peak, Han Yi is so astonished, while other disciples are even more amazed, constantly exclaiming. Even some low Qi cultivation level disciples, looking through the illusion fairy mirror, involuntarily turned pale, their bodies trembling. The illusion fairy mirror's image changes, zooming in and enlarging, focusing on the 100 disciples at the edge of the main peak, sweeping over each disciple's face and appearance, conveying their demeanor and expressions to more than 100,000 inner and outer peak disciples as if seeing them in person. Powerful, mysterious, and full of killing intent. A moment later, the image shifts once again, focusing on a middle-aged man seated above the main peak in the void. Within the man's eyes, it's as if the sun and moon are hanging upside down, constantly evolving life and death with each blink. It's the sect master. Oh my god, this is only my 2nd time seeing the sect master. The last time was during the initiation ceremony. Exclamations resounded from the people beside Han Yi, as his eyes couldn't help but flash a hint of awe looking at the sect master. Yuan Shun, Xuandan Sect's sect master, at the peak of the Golden Core stage, one of the most powerful cultivators of the Xuandan sect. Before today, Han Yi had only seen him once during the initiation ceremony over a decade ago. Seeing Yuan Shun through the illusion fairy mirror once again, his demeanor and temperament are the same as before. Just as Han Yi thought Yuan Shun would make a speech, the illusion fairy mirror suddenly went whoosh, and disconnected the spell, the shimmering clouds in the sky filling up the void occupied by the illusion fairy mirror. Alright, today's observation will end here. In 1 month, the sect will hold an inner and outer peak competition. Within this month, everyone can sign up at the peak master's residence. Seeing the image dissipate, Li Heng puts away the illusion fairy. Atterer and addresses the crowd. However, Han Yi had no interest in the inner and outer peak competition. For him, it's too high profile, not as good as cultivating. After bidding farewell to the 2 junior disciples beside him, Han Yi returned to his courtyard and began his closed-door cultivation. His goal, Qi cultivation 7th layer. First, he took out all the spirit stones and, along with the standard grade exorcise evil spirits pills he had previously refined, put them beside him. Then, he began to meditate and adjust his breathing. 1 day later, when he opened his eyes again, they were calm, reflecting the stillness of his inner heart. Next, to be safe, he took 5 standard quality exorcise evil spirits pills. Usually, breaking through from the 6th to the 7th layer of Qi cultivation required only 2 standard quality exorcise evil spirits pills. However, Han Yi had prepared extra exorcise evil spirits pills, so he took them all. Wasting a bit was harmless and beneficial. Following that, he grabbed the spirit stones and started to circulate his technique, gradually and slowly pushing his 6th layer 99/100ths Qi cultivation to 100/100ths complete stage. 1 month later, inside the quiet chamber, Han Yi opened his eyes as the spirit stone in his hand cracked with a snap. He stood up, his breath now more than 3 times stronger than a month ago. Chi cultivation 7th layer. Although there's only a single layer between the 7th and 6th layers, the difference is immense. This is a threshold. When reaching the Chi cultivating 7th layer, the law power within the body changes both in quantity and quality, preparing for the immortal path foundation building. Moreover, the divine sense begins to transform, and this is also the reason why sword control can be used only in the Chi cultivating 7th layer. Han Yi has the golden finger, so he bypasses this limitation, brings the sword control skill to a new height, and possesses the ability to control a sword. In fact, he broke through to the Chi cultivating 7th layer 3 days after his closed-door cultivation, but as his realm was unstable, he didn't stop cultivating. Instead, he continued to meditate for a month and consumed all the spirit stones before choosing to leave seclusion. Han Yi looked at the light red proficiency panel in front of him. Name: Han Yi. Lifespan: 3135. Realm: Chi cultivating 7th layer, 4/100. Cultivation skills: Fire profound skill entering micro stage 39/100. Skills: Alchemy skill fire is purely green 34/100. Spirit void finger fire is purely green 25/100. Sword control skill fire is purely green 43/100. Light body technique fire is purely green 24/100. Fire shield skill mastering 11/100. Turtle breath skill enter the hall stage 31/100. Talisman making skill initial glimpse of the way 19/100. Closing square bracket. It wasn't easy. It took 9 years of transmigration to finally step into the Chi cultivating 7th layer. The path to immortality is now in sight. Han Yi was overjoyed, and it took a long time for him to calm his uncontrollable emotions. After breaking through to the Chi cultivating 7th layer, his first goal was the 4 storage bags. Breaking the divine sense restriction of the Chi cultivating 8th layer was temporarily impossible. Han Yi chose the remaining 3 storage bags and used his newly transformed divine sense to erase their original interference. 3 days later, he broke open the first storage bag, took a glance, and was surprised. In the storage bag, spirit stones, magic tools, and scripture transmission jade plates occupied one corner. Han Yi calculated that there were about 100 mid-grade spirit stones and 3,000 low-grade spirit stones. As for magic tools, there were 2, 1 mid-grade and 1 low-grade. What made Han Yi's eyes widen was that besides this corner, the other spaces in the storage bag contained several boxes filled with various women's undergarments, such as cloth strips, lace, and mesh outfits. This blood god sect cultivator is a pervert. He really knows how to play. Han Yi didn't care about these boxes and only moved the spirit stones, magic tools, and scripture transmission jade plates into his own storage bag. Then he began to erase the divine sense restriction on the second storage bag. A week later, all 3 storage bags of the Chi cultivating 7th layer cultivators were all cleared out. Besides the first storage bag having strange clothes, the other 2 were normal. Han Yi obtained a total of 630 mid-grade spirit stones, 18,000 low-grade spirit stones, 4 mid-grade magic tools, 6 low-grade magic tools, 7 scripture transmission jade plates, 15 spiritual talismans, and various refining materials, pill refining materials, and formation materials. These 3 storage bags brought his wealth back to its peak. As for the 4th storage bag, since it had an 8th layer cultivator's restriction, Han Yi tried and found it would take at least 3 months to break, so he didn't bother with it. He had enough spirit stones for now. He would wait until he reached the 8th layer and his divine sense was further strengthened before erasing the restriction. He had high expectations for the 4th storage bag. Its owner was a cultivator who possessed the top-grade magic tool, Golden Light Shuttle. Even if there weren't top-grade magic tools within the storage bag, there should be quite a lot of high-grade magic tools or high-grade spiritual talismans, right? Using mid-grade spirit stones, Han Yi spent another week to further stabilize his cultivation base, then stopped cultivating and left his courtyard. At this moment, more than a month had passed since his closed-door cultivation. Next, one will go through the sex verification to enter the inner peak. However, one also need to carefully examine whether one should go to Dan Sword Peak or choose another inner peak. Chapter 62, Inner Peak Tournament. Translator. 549,690,339. Han Yi walked out of the courtyard and went down the path from Little Lingshu Peak, noticing the anxious and excited expressions on the faces of his junior disciples on their way up and down the peak. Stopping a familiar junior disciple, Han Yi asked a few questions and finally remembered that the competition between the inner and outer peaks of the Xuandan sect had already been going on for a while. Brother Han, you just found out. The inner peak competition started first and will last for a whole month. After the inner peak competition, the outer peak competition will begin and last even longer, a full 6 months. During this time, the disciples of the outer peak are all crowded on combat peak to watch the matches. It's so exciting. Brother Han, don't tell me you don't even know about combat peak. It seems you've been in seclusion for at least a month. Let me tell you, the familiar junior disciple explained for a while, then hurried down the mountain. Han Yi stood still, with curiosity rising on his face. The modified special mountain peak, combat peak. Quite a lot of activity. The combat peak, mentioned by the junior disciple just now, isn't actually one of the inner and outer peaks. It's not more than 100 meters high, instead, its top is flat. Rather than a mountain peak, it's more like a broad platform about 100 meters high. Combat Peak was specially prepared by the sect for the competitions between the inner and outer peak disciples, a section of a mountain brought from the depths of the Xuandan mountain range. This mountain section is made of a special material with ultra-high hardness, which was selected for this purpose. The location of Combat Peak lies at the junction between the inner and outer peaks. That flat area was selected to place this mountain section. Since half a month ago, Combat Peak has already been the battleground, with the inner peak disciples taking the stage first. All disciples of the inner peak are allowed to sign up, and in the end, they will be ranked according to their combat strength. The disciples ranked in the top 100 will receive generous rewards. It is said that the disciples ranked in the top 10 can even be granted the invaluable Foundation Establishment Pill. That's the Foundation Establishment Pill, one of the most important resources needed for cultivators to step from the peak of the Qi refining stage into the Foundation Establishment stage. The value of a Foundation Establishment Pill in the market is at least 2,000 mid-grade spirit stones, although it's actually priceless. Ever since Han Yi crossed over, his wealth had never even reached 1,000 mid-grade spirit stones, let alone 2,000. Even Foundation Establishment stage high-quality magic tools were only priced between 1,000 and 10,000 mid-grade spirit stones, which means the value of a Foundation Establishment Pill is comparable to that of a regular high-quality magic tool. This made all the inner peak disciples go crazy. Basically, those who thought they were strong enough all signed up. Even if they couldn't make it into the top 10, getting into the top 100 would still yield many valuable rewards. Foundation Establishment Pill, alas. My realm isn't high enough. Even if I got a Foundation Establishment Pill, I probably couldn't keep it. Han Yi shook his head, knowing that although he had broken through to the Qi refining stage 7, he was still far from the Immortal Path Foundation building. The Foundation Establishment Pill would be useless for him, besides, it could attract the attention of the Qi refining stage 9 cultivators from the inner peak. Secret attacks are hard to guard against, and he didn't want to be constantly vigilant against thieves for 1,000 days. Moreover, Han Yi knew that even if he really took part in the competition, he might not be able to make it into the top 10. Although he had advanced to the Qi refining stage 7, his cultivation base had just slightly stabilized, and he still needed some time to transform this realm breakthrough into actual combat power. He didn't think he could win against the senior brothers at the peak of the Qi refining stage 9 from the inner peak. Furthermore, even if he could win, he wouldn't compete. Even if he couldn't defeat the peak stage 9 cultivators, if he managed to beat regular stage 9 senior brothers, it would still cause a huge stir. Being too high profile could easily make him a target, especially since he had just provoked the Blood God sect, and Han Yi was on alert for some secret attacks. When he arrived at Combat Peak, which the previous junior disciple had spoken about, he saw countless disciples densely surrounding the broad platform, their eyes staring intently at the central area. In the central area, there was the combat platform, which was 3 meters higher than the rest of the platform. At this moment, on the combat platform, 2 young men wearing the cyan robes of the inner sect were fiercely fighting. Han Yi used his divine sense to examine them. These 2 young men should both be at the Qi refining stage 8. Both were controlling a mid-grade magic tool as they attacked each other. Han Yi watched for 3 breaths of time, then secretly shook his head. This one's control of the magic power within his body isn't subtle enough. When controlling the magic tool, there's always a slight delay at critical moments, which would be a fatal flaw on the battlefield. The one on the other side has poor skill. He's using too much force, to the point where it's actually counterproductive. If I were to face them, I would only need 2 wind demon daggers, and I could kill them in just 3 breaths. Han Yi suddenly had a thought in his inner heart. I can't personally participate in the battle, but I can learn from observing others' fights, absorb their experience, and simulate the battle. Although this method is not as effective as personally participating in the battle, it can still accumulate theoretical experience. This path is feasible. Han Yi's heart was delighted. He had indeed overlooked this aspect before. It was only when he was at the combat peak that he suddenly remembered that he could also learn from watching the battles and absorb the experiences of others to make up for his shortcomings and start with the theory. Moreover, when I return to the courtyard every day, one can imagine my opponent in front of me, in an attacking state, and what I should do to win quickly. The more Han Yi thought about it, the brighter his eyes became. Learning from others and making up for one's shortcomings, the disciples who participated in the battle made progress, and those who watched from the side could also gain experience. He suddenly realized it was no wonder the sect's upper echelons encouraged and even required inner and outer disciples to watch the grand competition of battles. His vision was too narrow. Han Yi suddenly understood the sect's painstaking efforts. Since their failure in the struggle against the Blood God sect, the Xuanden sect had spared no expense in launching a series of measures, all aimed at improving the fighting strength of the sect's disciples. Suddenly, there was a sudden change in the battlefield. A youth with poor technique and excessive force was hit by the opponent's magical weapon, vomiting blood and flying back, fainting on the spot. What a pity, I originally had high hopes for Brother Zhu. One didn't expect Brother Zhu to be defeated and stop at the top 200. Brother Li is strong, I guessed it right. There's a limit to being strong. Even if he enters the top 200, he will stop there. The surrounding disciples discussed for a while, then quieted down. Meanwhile, on the combat platform, there were professionals from the sect to tidy up and provide medical treatment. A moment later, the second battle continued. Han Yi found a corner, sat down to watch, with bright eyes, constantly judging and analyzing in his mind, putting himself into a certain battling role, and imagining what he would do if he encountered the opponent. Time quietly slipped away, and the night grew darker. It wasn't until one of the Foundation establishment elders on duty at the combat platform announced the end of the grand competition for the day and asked everyone to come back tomorrow that Han Yi reluctantly got up and left. The many disciples surrounding the combat platform also gradually dispersed. Throughout the day, Han Yi had forgotten to apply for the inner sect verification. He used to be eager to enter the inner peak, but now, after advancing to the 7th layer of chi refining, he wasn't in such a hurry. There was no need to rush for something that was a sure thing. Upon returning to his courtyard at Little Lingshu Peak, Han Yi began to imagine fighting against enemies and then use the Wind Demon Dagger to attack. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the backyard, 3 daggers intertwined and formed a net, showing their killing intent. Yes, after advancing to the 7th layer of chi refining, Han Yi could now control 3 Wind Demon Daggers simultaneously. Moreover, according to his estimation, he could control up to 5 Wind Demon Daggers at the same time within the realm of the 7th layer of chi refining. Only by advancing to the 8th layer of chi refining could he completely control the 7 daggers and bring out the strongest state of this set of middle-grade magical weapons. Even though he could only use 3 daggers at the moment, he was extremely satisfied. At this moment, his combat power was more than twice as strong as when he was in Tianqing City. He was confident that he could quickly resolve 3 opponents at the 7th layer of chi refining. As for facing a common 8th layer chi refining cultivator, well, that was hard to estimate since the only one he had fought was the twisted youth holding the golden light shuttle, and he was by no means an ordinary 8th layer chi refining cultivator. Boom! His focus was distracted, and one of the daggers slammed into a fake mountain in the backyard, shattering it instantly. Rocks splattered, and dust roared. Han Yi waved his hand, and the dust dispersed. Chapter 63, Azure Dragon Peak. Translator. 549,690,339. First, put other thoughts aside and imagine I am the one going on stage to control the sword and face the enemy. In the first round, if I were the one. In the backyard, Han Yi constantly deduced and simulated from theory to semi-practice, drawing battle experience to make up for his own shortcomings. The next day, he got up early and went down the mountain again. When he set foot on the combat peak, he saw many disciples surrounding the combat platform in the forefront. I still need to grab a good spot. He found a slightly forward position, sat down cross-legged, and waited for the duels to begin. A moment later, when the time came, the Foundation establishment elders first announced the list of participants for today's competition. Then, without any unnecessary formalities, the 2 disciples whose names were called went on stage to fight. This time, it was still the chi cultivation stage at the 8th level. Yesterday, Han Yi had also learned a bit about it. The inner peak competition had been going on for almost half a month already. Through regular matches and revival matches, the top 400 disciples had been selected. Among these 400 disciples, only about 20 had outstanding combat power at the 7th level, while the rest were chi cultivation stage disciples at the 8th and 9th levels. The competition now was the knockout stage from 400 to 200. It was said that there would be another revival match after the knockout stage. After determining the top 200, there would be another round of knockout and revival matches to determine the top 100. After the top 100 were selected, the rules would change again, with a ranking match for the top 100 disciples, granting different rewards to the corresponding ranked disciples. Before this, more than 1,000 disciples had signed up for the Inner Peak competition, with more than 90% of the Inner Peak disciples participating. With so many people signing up, the duration of the competition was quite long, requiring a month's time. Han Yi was not very interested in how many people signed up, but he was concerned about the 1-month duration of the competition, which meant that he still had nearly half a month left to watch hundreds of battles. 3 days later, the top 200 of the Inner Peak competition were determined. 8 days later, the top 100 of the Inner Peak competition were determined. 15 days later, the Inner Peak competition ranking match for the top 100 ended. Thus far, the Inner Peak competition came to an official close. During these 15 days, Han Yi was like a sponge, crazily absorbing the combat experience of the Inner Peak disciples. Although these competitions were not yet at the level of real-life fights, they had great learning and reference value. Especially during the top 100 ranking matches, more than 90% of the participating disciples were at the 9th level of chi cultivation stage. Moreover, these disciples had returned from their cave heaven trial in Yujing Mountain Holy Land just over a month ago. Han Yi noticed that these returning trial disciples used the sharpest, most concise, most direct, and most effective means to win in the shortest amount of time. This was combat skill. In short, with the same physique, some people could do much with little effort, while others only achieved half the result with twice the effort. This was the difference in skill. Han Yi was extremely eager to learn these skills and crazily absorbed them. After the ranking matches were over, Han Yi still felt it was not enough. After returning to his courtyard, he spent nearly half a month on simulation, summary, induction, and replay to fully digest and convert the experience of the past 2 weeks into his own reserve. However, he also knew that these accumulations were still only in theory. To truly transform them into strength would require a long process. Of course, if he could enter the cave heaven trial, he believed that he would be able to make rapid progress in a short time and bring his combat skills to the extreme. Like Han Yi, there were also many Xuanden sect disciples who seized this opportunity to constantly learn and accumulate. Even if they were not as good at summarizing as Han Yi, they still made some progress on their own original foundation. As a result, under the influence of this trend, the overall combat level of the Xuanden sect was quietly improving. The ranking competition started a month later, followed by the grand competition among the Outer Peak disciples. There were even more disciples participating in the Outer Peak competition, resulting in a more massive and grand roster. The entire sect was immersed in this grand event. However, this time Han Yi did not participate. Instead, he found an opportunity and entered the sect's management hall to apply for promotion to the Inner Peak. The assessment for promotion to Inner Peak disciple was very simple, which was to have a foundation establishment stage cultivator on duty from the sect to examine one's cultivation base. Han Yi's cultivation base had stabilized at this point, and he easily passed the assessment. Following that, he applied to move up to Azure Dragon Peak instead of Dan Sword Peak, which he had initially been fond of. After all, concerning his future, Han Yi did not just randomly select based on his own feelings. Instead, he carefully weighed multiple factors and made a decision only after thorough consideration. Before making the decision, he sought out several Inner Peak disciples he had good relationships with, asking them numerous questions, and finally settled on a plan, giving up Dan Sword Peak in favor of the top-ranked Inner Peak, Azure Dragon Peak. Guandi, Yan Ru, Luo Yunzhou, and even personally went up to Dan Sword Peak to find Kui Xingchen, who he had already somewhat acquainted with. Finally, Han Yi determined his first choice. The main reason was that he had learned about the limitations of the Dan Sword skill. Among the 9 Inner Peaks, Dan Sword Peak ranked almost last. The reason for this was not only that the Dan sword skill was difficult to practice and had few disciples joining Dan sword peak, but also that the skill itself had inherent limitations. In fact, the Dan sword skill is a type of sword control skill. Using alchemy to create a sword, controlling the sword through alchemy, and combining alchemy skill with sword control skill, cultivating a sword core in the dantian, which is a kind of sword pellet. Although this type of cultivation has strong combat power in the chi cultivation stage and even the foundation establishment stage, a deadly problem arises at the peak of the foundation establishment stage. The difficulty of forming a golden core for cultivators practicing Dan sword skill is countless times more challenging than that for ordinary cultivators. Because when breaking through to the golden core stage, cultivators who practice Dan sword skill need to shatter their sword core and condense it again. Only after this can they be considered successful in forming a golden core and advance to the next level. Only one person in the history of Xuandan sect has been able to shatter the sword core and successfully condense it again, which illustrates how terrifying the difficulty of this process is. Easy in the early stages and challenging in the later stages, there is no shortcut on the immortal path. These considerations are the primary reason why Han Yi, after much deliberation, chose to give up on the Dan sword skill and instead opted for Azure Dragon Peak. He was not foolish, of course. Although he had the proficiency panel, Han Yi would never do anything that would unnecessarily increase his difficulties. Thus, he applied to join the Azure Dragon Peak. Under normal circumstances, when an outer peak disciple applies to enter an inner peak, the application will be submitted to an inner peak for selection. If it is rejected, the disciple will be randomly assigned to another inner peak. After submitting his application, Han Yi sought out Luo Yunzhou and informed him of his choice. Luo Yunzhou was delighted and assured him that there would be no problems. 3 days later, Han Yi finally received the results. This time, there were no surprises, and he straightforwardly moved into Azure Dragon Peak. His relocation coincided with the Outer Peak competition, and all Outer Peak disciples were focused on the competition, so it did not cause any ripples. On Little Lingshu Peak, where he had lived for over 10 years since crossing over, the courtyard he had inhabited quietly closed and awaited its next resident. Having confirmed his move to Azure Dragon Peak, Han Yi declined Luo Yunzhou's offer of help and chose a relatively quiet but not too remote courtyard. Afterward, he followed Luo Yunzhou to the spiritual vein core node of Azure Dragon Peak, the Azure Dragon Palace, to meet a sect elder. This elder was Luo Yunzhou's master. And it was also thanks to Luo Yunzhou's master's help that he was able to smoothly enter Azure Dragon Peak this time. Chapter 64, by Wanqing. Translator. 549,690,339. In the Xuandan sect, when disciples from the outer peaks, who have reached the 7th level of Qi cultivation stage, enter the inner peak, they have two choices. The first is to choose a foundation establishment stage cultivator as a master, becoming a true disciple, thus creating a stronger bond between master and disciple. The second option is to be affiliated with a foundation establishment stage cultivator, where the relationship between them is basically close to none. Even so, many times, these foundation establishment elders do not know how many disciples are affiliated under their guidance. In another perspective, these disciples, who are affiliated with certain elders, can be considered as free disciples. When they advance to the foundation establishment stage, the affiliation is automatically dissolved. However, if it is the first choice of a true disciple, regardless if they reach the foundation establishment stage or golden core stage, their master will remain their master, emphasizing a one day as a teacher, a lifetime as a father kind of inheritance relationship. The main reason Han Yi was able to join the Azure Dragon Peak was that Luo Yunzhou's master approved his application and placed him under her guidance. One should know that Azure Dragon Peak is the #1 peak of the inner peaks, and the competition to enter is fierce. Whether it's disciples from the outer peaks or from one of the other 8 peaks of the inner peaks, many apply to transfer to Azure Dragon Peak. The available spots in the peak are limited. This time, due to Luo Yunzhou's introduction, Han Yi has no choice but to pay respects to his new elder. This way, he won't be regarded as arrogant and conceited. Azure Dragon Peak, Azure Dragon Palace, Elders Cultivation Quiet Room. Luo Yunzhou pushes the door open and enters with familiarity, and Han Yi follows closely behind. In the room, a female cultivator is sitting on a cushion. When she sees the two entering, her gaze goes beyond Luo Yunzhou and falls on Han Yi. As their gazes meet, Han Yi is struck by her stunning appearance. The female cultivator in front of him wears a dark-colored robe that symbolizes her status as an elder. Since she is sitting, Han Yi cannot determine her figure and does not dare to look around. However, in terms of appearance, she is the most stunning woman Han Yi has seen since his arrival in this world. A silver hairpin holds her black hair in place. She has a delicate and beautiful face, with bright eyes, refined eyebrows, and a perfect nose, making her both exquisite and stunning. Han Yi does not dare to look too long and lowers his head to show respect. Junior Han Yi pays respects to Elder Bai. Han Yi slightly bends his waist and clasps his hands in greeting. Stand up, your name is Han Yi. Bai Wanqing's voice is clear and bright, not like someone in her 40s, but more like someone in her 20s. That's right, this female cultivator is Luo Yunzhou's master. On the way here, Luo Yunzhou briefly introduced her to Han Yi. Her full name is Bai Wanqing, an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator, only in her early 40s this year. However, female cultivators often have their appearance preserved, making her look like she is in her 20s. Halfway along the road, Luo Yunzhou also warned Han Yi that his master doesn't like chatty disciples, so he should be cautious and speak as little as possible. Han Yi takes the advice to heart. Yes, Junior Han Yi replies. Following that, there is a silence of 3 breaths. Han Yi can't help but raise his head and see Bai Wanqing's bright eyes staring at him. They exchange a glance, and he immediately lowers his head again without any change in expression. You are good, I heard from Yunzhou that you saved him in Tianqing City. Han Yi takes a glance at Luo Yunzhou by his side. It seems that Luo Yunzhou didn't tell Bai Wanqing about him killing people beyond his level. Otherwise, Bai Wanqing would not ask this question. Han Yi replies, as fellow sect brothers, we should help each other. Bai Wanqing's eyes flash with a hint of appreciation, and she asks warmly, would you like to become my disciple? Han Yi is slightly surprised. This elder is actually interested in him, but he already made his decision and declines her offer without hesitation. Junior's talent is ordinary, and I'm afraid I cannot live up to Elder Bai's kindness. Bai Wanqing smiles, the first time she has since Han Yi entered the room. Han Yi lifts his head and almost stares blankly at her. Not bad, you are neither arrogant nor impatient. You are very good. If you encounter any difficulties in the future, you can come and find me. Practice well, you may leave. Fortunately, Bai Wanqing did not insist on keeping him and even told him to find her if he encounters any difficulties. Han Yi naturally takes her words as a courtesy, thanks her, and leaves. Luo Yunzhou follows him, out as well. One told you, right? Among the female foundation establishment elders, my master is one of the most stunningly beautiful. Oh, yes, Brother Han, I want to tell you, my master has no Dao companion right now. If you ever reach the foundation establishment stage, maybe you could pursue her. Han Yi's mouth twitches slightly. This guy is willing to use even his own master to win him over. He's got quite the skill. Brother Han, today is your first day moving to the peak. Come, let me show you around our Azure Dragon Peak and admire the celestial scenery of the #1 inner peak. Luo Yunzhou is full of excitement and wants to take Han Yi on a tour of Azure Dragon Peak. Han Yi originally wants to refuse, but on further thought, he will be staying on Azure Dragon Peak for a long period, so it's better to familiarize himself with the place. This way, he won't risk embarrassing himself later on. Fittingly, Luo Yunzhou is so enthusiastic it's hard to say no, and besides, it won't take much time. Additionally, among the 9 inner peaks, the Azure Dragon Peak ranks first. He was quite interested in this as well. Before this, he had focused on his spiritual practice and only went out to visit the 21 markets of the inner and outer peaks and a few administrative great halls of the Xuandan sect. He had already visited all 18 markets of the outer peak when he was at Little Lingshu Peak. As for the 3 inner peak markets, located in Fuai, Red Sun, and White Tiger, Han Yi visited the Red Sun Fang most frequently because he had established an initial relationship of trust with the 9 Dragons store there. Although this relationship was only preliminary, it saved him a lot of trouble. So before this, Han Yi had only visited Azure Dragon Peak a few times. Before transcending, he had been there once, and after submitting the application, he visited once more. Both visits were rushed and didn't allow for lingering. He had heard from Luo Yunzhou that there were about 300 courtyards on Azure Dragon Peak, but the number of disciples was limited to less than 200. The courtyard accommodations were not full due to the limited resources. The resources here referred to cultivation resources, and the core resource was the 4th stage high-grade spirit vein under Azure Dragon Peak. More than 200 disciples would put a great burden on the 4th stage high-grade spirit vein, and over time, the spirit vein would lose its grade. Therefore, this policy was adopted. First, Luo Yunzhou took Han Yi on a familiarization tour of Azure Dragon Palace, both inside and outside. The palace was elegant and rich in immortal qi. The higher the location, the higher the status it represented. Han Yi gazed at the tallest tower on Azure Dragon Peak, where a golden core stage cultivator was stationed all year round. This cultivator also controlled the formations and restrictions of Azure Dragon Peak, which once activated, could even withstand the attack of a golden core peak cultivator. Master Golden Core resides there, junior brother Han. There is always a Master Golden Core stationed at the tower on the peak. He is a real master. Luo Yunzhou sighed with admiration, the envy in his eyes obvious, and spoke. What is the true definition of a master? Han Yi had never heard this term before and asked. Oh, junior brother Han doesn't know. Luo Yunzhou explained, true cultivation actually starts at the foundation establishment stage. Foundation establishment is the beginning of cultivation. It builds the foundation. As for the golden core stage cultivators, there is a saying, swallow one golden core and realize that our fate is not controlled by the heavens. Only then can one become real, and earn the title of master. Han Yi learned a valuable lesson. This was the first time he had heard this and realized that Luo Yunzhou's theoretical knowledge was much more solid than his own. He should ask for more guidance in the future. Then, Luo Yunzhou took Han Yi out of Azure Dragon Palace and wandered about Azure Dragon Peak, where various courtyards of different sizes and characteristics were situated. Some of them even had additional formations set up apart from the natural restrictions inherent to the peak, creating an interesting view from afar. Han Yi didn't get too close but strolled to the edge of the Fairyland Peak and looked out at the rolling cloud sea. He saw an immortal boat breaking through the cloud sea, passing between the Azure Dragon Peak and the extremely distant Black Tortoise Peak, barely visible. This place is called Azure Dragon Cliff. Whenever I'm frustrated, one come here to observe the cloud sea, admire the immortal mountain, and gain peace of mind and determination. Junior brother Han, this is the first inner peak, and you will never regret it. Luo Yunzhou said loudly, reaching out to embrace the immortal clouds. Indeed, it is a truly picturesque fairyland. Han Yi took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. As he breathed out, his body and mind became calm. The immortal path is endless, and this will be the place where I prove my way. Han Yi's inner heart was filled with great ambition. Right, one just remembered that my master has an important matter for me to attend to. I apologize, junior brother Han, but this is as far as I can guide you. From here on, you can explore the Azure Dragon Peak on your own, and it will definitely not disappoint you. Luo Yunzhou suddenly remembered that he had something to do and bowed as he took his leave. Han Yi bowed and thanked him in return. As he watched Luo Yunzhou leave, Han Yi turned around and stood on Azure Dragon Cliff, continuing to gaze at the cloud sea. A moment later, he left Azure Dragon Cliff, already excited, and decided to walk around the peak. After walking for half an hour, he reached the opposite side of the Fairyland Peak and decided to return to his new courtyard. As he passed by an uninhabited courtyard at some distance, he suddenly noticed something unusual. A faint flicker of spiritual energy fluctuation flashed in the courtyard. If it were a few months ago when Han Yi was at the 6th stage of qi cultivation, he might not have noticed this subtle change. However, he had already advanced to the 7th stage of qi cultivation and had thoroughly stabilized his cultivation base. His divine sense had leapt far beyond that of the 6th stage. It was with this divine sense that he noticed the faint fluctuation. Is it a certain immortal affinity in such a remote courtyard? Immortal affinity is a general term that could refer to heavenly treasures, spiritual treasures, artifacts, or even high-quality spirit liquid and spirit stones. It was not impossible for such treasures to be born in such a remote and uninhabited courtyard on Azure Dragon Peak after being nurtured by the 4th stage spirit vein over many years. Han Yi hesitated a bit. If it had been outside the sect, he would have considered the situation carefully. But on second thought, there was no doubt that the safety of Azure Dragon Peak would be guaranteed. After all, Azure Dragon Peak was the first inner peak of the Xuandan sect, with a golden core stage cultivator stationed there and nearly 24 foundation establishment elders. What was there to fear? If discovered, the worst-case scenario would be to hand over the immortal affinity to the sect, and they would receive some consolation compensation in return, earning some extra profit. With that in mind, he lightly leapt over the courtyard wall and landed inside. Chapter 65, Collision. Translator. 549,690,339. In the courtyard, it was deathly still. Han Yi climbed over the wall, carefully taking a few steps forward. The fluctuations of spirit energy he sensed had completely disappeared after he jumped into the courtyard. However, his curiosity was thoroughly aroused. He circled the courtyard without making a sound, examining it once but furrowed his brows. Strange, it disappeared. Han Yi did not doubt his perception just now. The wave of spirit energy did exist, but it vanished in the blink of an eye. Forget it. If it's really a mortal affinity, it seems that I'm not destined for it, said Han Yi with a smile, not dwelling on it. A mortal affinity was something that one rejoiced about if they could attain it, but there was no use in forcing it if they could not. He was about to leave when his footsteps suddenly halted, and his figure vanished from the spot, appearing at a corner of the courtyard. He sensed that a young man had climbed over the courtyard wall and was heading toward the center of the courtyard. Han Yi hid only because it was his cautious nature. The next moment, the corner of his mouth twitched. What am one hiding for? One haven't done anything wrong. There's no need to hide. Just as Han Yi was about to stand up and leave, he shrank back. If I leave now, it will seem like I have a guilty conscience and may arouse suspicion. It's better to wait until this person leaves before I leave. Moreover, this person looks even more suspicious than me. There must be something wrong. If one go out, trouble will surely follow. Han Yi sat down in the corner. To avoid suspicion, he even used the turtle breath skill to suppress his aura to the lowest level. He seemed like a dormant spirit, his breath barely detectable. Though he hid his presence, Han Yi still cast his gaze at the young man not too far away, wanting to see what the other party was up to. Though he had no intention of spying, curiosity still got the better of him in this chance encounter. Upon entering the courtyard, the young man directly walked to an open space in the courtyard. He looked around cautiously, and upon seeing nothing unusual, he took out an object, placed it in front of him, and released his hold on it. The object was a palm-sized mirror that floated about 1.5 meters above the ground when he let go. Next, from a quiet room in the courtyard, a streak of light burst out and shot towards the floating mirror. The mirror, stimulated by the light, projected an illusory figure. Han Yi glanced at the quiet room where he had been earlier. The room was as quiet as before, with no abnormalities. But just now, he had clearly seen the streak of light shooting out from there. And the fluctuations of spirit energy in the light were the same as the ones he had previously sensed outside the courtyard. The immortal affinity he had been searching for was this mysterious light. However, this light could also hide its own aura, indicating that it was not a natural treasure but some kind of special artifact. Han Yi's curiosity was fully piqued. At the same time, he operated his turtle breath skill even more profoundly. In such situations, secretiveness and mysterious actions were bound to be hiding some unspeakable secrets. Han Yi did not want to get involved. He only wanted to cultivate diligently and achieve immortality. At this moment, he somewhat regretted crossing the wall. If he had known, he would have left quickly and returned to his courtyard to cultivate. But regret was useless, and luckily, he had his turtle breath skill. No matter what secrets the other party held, he would merely leave, considering it as if he had never encountered it, and it would have nothing to do with him. Just as he was thinking this way, the illusory figure projected by the mirror, after being stimulated by the light, flickered slightly before stabilizing. "Hongguang, what's the matter?" asked the illusory figure, its voice hoarse and not like a real person. "Esteemed elder son, this disciple has an important matter to report." The sly-looking young man immediately replied. "Speak." The disciple has finished the inner peak competition, ranking in the 9th place. According to the information I have gathered so far, those who rank in the top 10 of this competition will be allowed to enter Schwanden Peak and receive the Foundation Establishment Pill. One dare to ask elder son, what should this disciple do after entering Schwanden Peak? The sly-looking young man inquired. "Good, very good. For now, you don't need to do anything. Just follow the steps, complete your foundation establishment, infiltrate Schwanden sect, and wait for the right moment to strike." Upon hearing this, the sly-looking young man breathed a sigh of relief. At his cultivation level, if the sect asked him to do something, it would mean he would have to put his life on the line. Though he valued his sect's honor above all else, no one would want to die if they could avoid it. Besides, there's one more thing I need to report. After the Cave Heaven trial and the competition between the inner and external peaks of Schwanden sect, all the disciples have made significant improvements in their combat abilities. If this continues, what should we do? The sly-looking young man asked, a worrisome expression on his face. Upon hearing this, the illusory figure lightly laughed and replied, "No need for concern, they're nothing more than paper tigers. No matter how much they struggle, they're still paper tigers. One day, the Xuanden mountain range will be renamed Blood God Mountain Range, and the 3 major sects of the Dakion region will become 4 major sects. Crouched in the corner, Han Yi's expression changed slightly upon hearing this conversation, but he remained composed. The turtle breath skill continued to help him hide his presence from being detected. Shortly after, in the open courtyard, the illusory figure said a few more words before disappearing with a faint flicker. Next, a beam of light flashed out from the floating mirror. This time, Han Yi saw it very clearly. The beam of light was an illusory black bead. Once the illusory bead left the mirror, it shot into the previous quiet room. The familiar aura fluctuations reappeared as the bead emerged but disappeared completely after the bead entered the quiet room. After reaching out to retrieve the floating mirror, the sly-looking young man carefully surveyed the surroundings, saw nothing unusual, and then disappeared as he vaulted over the wall and left. Han Yi didn't get up right away but continued to sit cross-legged, using the turtle breath skill. However, his expression was extremely grave. He had accidentally stumbled upon a spy from the Blood God sect. Han Yi recognized the young man from earlier. He was a disciple from Vermilion Bird Peak named Chu Yi, not the Hongguang that Han Yi had just heard. It seemed that the young man had hidden his real name. During the previous Inner Peak competition, Han Yi had seen Chu Yi perform on the combat platform. Chu Yi was a decisive cultivator with strong combat skills. Eventually, he earned the 9th place in the competition, becoming one of the most outstanding cultivators at the 9th peak of Qi cultivation stage. This time, he would receive a foundation establishment pill from the sect, and his chances of successfully establishing his foundation were quite high. However, Han Yi wasn't sure if Chu Yi was a Blood God sect member who had been intentionally sent into the Xuanden sect or a spy that the Blood God sect had developed within the sect. If it was the former, it would be terrifying. It would mean that the Blood God sect had plotted against the Xuanden sect many years earlier, intending to send Blood God sect disciples into Xuanden sect for cultivation while ensuring their loyalty through some means. But it was more than just that. Han Yi considered a possibility, his expression not just serious but also grim. This possibility was that since the Blood God sect could send Qi cultivation stage disciples into Xuanden sect, might there be even earlier arrangements in which those disciples had already succeeded in their foundation establishment and become foundation establishment elders within the sect? As soon as this thought occurred to him, it firmly occupied Han Yi's mind, making his expression even worse. A moment later, he forced himself to calm down. Just like 10 years ago in Mengshan City, when encountering unexpected incidents, he had to remain composed. Only by calmly analyzing the situation could he find the right course of action. Simply entertaining wild thoughts would be of no help, and might even make matters worse. Following that, Han Yi cleared his mind, closed his eyes, and his breath became almost imperceptible. Chapter 66, Accusation. Translator. 549,690,339. Sunrise and sunset. In order not to be noticed, Han Yi waited for an entire night before he got up and left quietly. During this night, however, he gained something, and in his heart, he had made a decision. As he leapt over the wall, he subtly paused before noticing the familiar spirit energy fluctuation in the courtyard again. He also speculated about the illusory bead. If his guess was correct, the bead should be a special magical tool, and when combined with the mirror, it could transmit images and sounds at a distance. As for why the illusory bead would emit weak spirit energy fluctuations from time to time, Han Yi didn't know the magic principle behind it. After all, he was not a real immortal and couldn't be all-knowing. Han Yi kept a composed expression on his face all the way back to the courtyard, and after activating the formation, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. He sat down in his quiet room and reconsidered the things he needed to do next. First of all, the prerequisite for doing this was to clear himself of any involvement. With his 7th level Qi cultivation, he could not afford to get involved in the dark fight between the two sects. Second, he must report the conspiracy. If he hadn't stumbled upon it, it would have been fine to ignore it, but now that he knew, not reporting it would seem insincere. Moreover, in the long run, it would have an impact on him as well. If the Xuanden sect fell, he would become a loose cultivator, losing his stable sect protection. Han Yi had always believed in the value of staying under a big tree, so when it came to the survival of the Xuanden sect, he would do his best to help as long as his safety was ensured. Third, he needed to choose an appropriate method to report the situation to the sect, and after reporting it, the sect must take action instead of just letting it sink silently. Based on these 3 points, Han Yi listed several possible methods. The most direct way was to directly approach the sect leader, a Golden Core Supreme Elder, or a Foundation Establishment Elder. For example, the Golden Core Stage Cultivator who presided over the tower on Azure Dragon Peak, or Bai Wanqing, Luo Yunzhou's master, whom he had met just yesterday. As for the sect leader, Han Yi couldn't reach him with his current status. Meanwhile, he didn't dare to risk reporting to a reachable Golden Core Supreme Elder or a Foundation Establishment Elder. It's hard to know someone's true intentions, and if they had secretly joined the Blood God sect, he would be walking straight into a trap. Han Yi carefully reviewed the people he had encountered since his arrival and dealings in the sect, trying to find the most appropriate method from his experiences. A moment later, his eyes lit up. I've got it. The place with the most secure identities in the whole Xuandan sect should be the markets of the inner and outer peaks. The 18 markets of the outer peak and the 3 markets of the inner peak can all be accessed through wearing masks and hiding one's aura. Therefore, they are the best places to report this. Among the heavier weight options is the inner peak market, namely, Red Sun, Oversea, and White Tiger. Among them, I frequent the Red Sun the most. So, all I need to do is to make a trip to the Red Sun market, and once I get there, I'll just. With a clear direction in mind, Han Yi visualized in his mind what he would do after he arrived at the market. He thought through every detail, and then took out a piece of basic talisman paper left from his previous practice. On the paper, he wrote down the details of discovering the Blood God sect's traitors. After writing, he got up, left the room, and headed down Azure Dragon Peak towards Red Sun Peak. A moment later, Han Yi entered the Red Sun market, put on a mask, and concealed his energy before strolling through the market. The market not only had private high-level shops like the Nine Dragons shop, but also sect-owned shops like the Profound Immortal Pill shop and the Profound Fire Pill shop. There were also some associations jointly established by Qi Cultivation 9th Stage disciples, as well as private stalls selling pills, magical tools, spiritual talismans, array plates, and more. Furthermore, after the Inner Peak tournament, the atmosphere of private transactions in the sect became more intense. The number of people in the market was at least twice as many as before the war with the Blood God sect. This was the first time Han Yi had strolled around the entire Red Sun market, as he had always been focused on his goals and had never wasted any time exploring it before. After going around one time, Han Yi became thoroughly familiar with the market's layout and went straight to the center of the market. The inner and outer peak markets were both established on a designated area within the peaks and naturally managed by the sect. However, the sect only managed the safety and order of the market and did not interfere with its operations. At the center of the square stood a 9-story tower. This tower was established by the sect to maintain the safety of the square. And Han Yi learned that every day, there were 3 Foundation Establishment stage cultivators stationed here. His destination this time was this tower. To be more precise, it was the 3 Foundation Establishment stage cultivators in this tower. As he walked in front of the tower, Han Yi suddenly took out an ordinary flying dagger from his storage bag, with a talisman attached to the tail of the dagger. Then he suddenly threw it, and with a swish, the flying dagger broke through the gate and went straight in. Even if it was just basic talisman paper, its toughness was beyond normal and it wouldn't be torn apart by this simple throw. In the meantime, as he threw the flying dagger, Han Yi quickly shifted along the streets of the square, changing his course and lastly avoiding suspicion by stepping into the Julong store. At the moment he left, a doubtful voice suddenly rang out behind him, "Who dares to provoke our Red Sun Fang?" Then the voice disappeared, but there were 3 Foundation Establishment stage cultivator auras rising to the sky, covering the entire square. Upon entering the Julong store, Han Yi appeared composed, but in fact, his heart was slightly nervous. He didn't want to be discovered, fearing that there might be a spy from the Blood God sect among the Foundation Establishment stage cultivators of the Xuandan sect. But if he were truly discovered, he would have no choice but to be honest and expose everything. Moreover, most importantly, if discovered, he would not believe that all 3 of those stationary Foundation Establishment stages in the square belonged to the Blood God sect. As long as there was one of them who wasn't, at least his safety could be guaranteed. This was why he chose the tower as his target. As it turned out, Han Yi thought too much. Even if Blood God sect had infiltrated Xuandan sect, their chances of success were sparse, especially at the Foundation Establishment stage, where they progressed from the outer peak step by step to the inner peak and then gradually grow up. In just 3 breaths of time, those 3 terrifying auras belonging to the Foundation establishment stage had already been withdrawn, and the entire Red Sun Fang regained its calm. Why did the 3 elders come out? Could it be that someone was robbing a cultivator within the square? He Fangwei was slightly surprised. Since he had been assigned as the shopkeeper and has been in charge of Red Sun Fang's Julong store, this was the first time he had seen the 3 Foundation establishment elders who were stationed in the square come out all together to release their aura and cover the entire square, so he couldn't help but be amazed. However, within 3 breaths of time, those 3 heart-stirring auras disappeared. Strange, really strange. He Fangwei shook his head, knowing that it was about the Foundation establishment elders' time and was certainly not in a position to make any judgment on his own. Oh right, Taoist friend, would you like to sell some pills recently? Or is it the gold and silver pill? He Fangwei's eyes fell on Han Yi, who entered the store, and shone slightly. Han Yi's nervousness in his heart eased a bit with the converge of the 3 auras outside, but he still didn't dare to let his guard down. Seeing He Fangwei asking, he casually replied, "No, this time I'm here mainly to buy some materials." Chapter 67, Yuan Shun. Translator. 549,690,339. A moment later, Han Yi left Julong's shop, and in his storage bag, there were more elixir refining materials, as well as various miscellaneous items like spirit sand and spiritual talismans. As he walked out of Julong's shop, Han Yi didn't look back, his expression unchanged and his pace and speed remaining the same as before, not showing any urgency. On his way out of the market without any trouble, Han Yi walked for a while before he took off his mask. After removing the mask, he didn't deliberately look back, but instead calmly descended from the Red Sun Peak and returned to the Azure Dragon Peak. When he set foot in his own courtyard and activated the formation, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. Although he had appeared composed along the way, his heart was already on edge, fearing that Foundation establishment elders would suddenly descend from the sky and take him away. It looks like one was overthinking. It doesn't matter, it's better to be prepared. I wonder if those 3 Foundation establishment stage cultivators will submit the things one wrote on the paper. Forget it, let's just leave it at that. I've done everything I could, and if it doesn't serve as a warning, then it's just fate. Han Yi went into meditation to cultivate, but he was a bit restless, so he simply stopped cultivating and walked to the backyard to practice sword control skill. After advancing to the Qi Refinement 7th layer, he needed to change his cultivation technique, turning from the basic fire profound skill to a higher level technique. He hadn't thought about this aspect for the time being, and since he was unable to focus on cultivation, he practiced sword control skill. Next, his plan was to progress his realm and various skills simultaneously, using time to accumulate experience and achieving long-term progress through practice. On the other side, 2 hours ago, when Han Yi's thrown dagger passed through the central tower of the Red Sun Fang, a middle-aged man sitting cross-legged in the tower opened his eyes instantly and grabbed the dagger with a swift move. On the other side, another elderly cultivator guarding the tower, released a powerful aura and shouted loudly, "Who dares provoke Red Sun Fang?" Before his voice fell, he had already appeared next to the middle-aged man, only to see the latter holding an ordinary dagger in one hand and an unremarkable spiritual talisman in the other, his expression slightly solemn. "Elder Lu, what is this?" The middle-aged cultivator named Lu Anping did not answer, but gripped the spiritual talisman tightly, and with a sweep, rushed out of the tower, his momentum soaring into the sky. However, at this moment, people passing by the tower were shocked, and in order to avoid misunderstandings, they all retreated slightly, without panicking and fleeing. The elderly cultivator and the 3rd Foundation establishment stage cultivator stationed here followed closely, fully releasing their auras and scanning their surroundings. "Should we use the patrol immortal mirror to catch the person who just barged in?" Seeing the solemn expression on the middle-aged man's face, the elderly cultivator suggested. The Patrol Immortal Mirror is a top-grade magical artifact placed in the tower, capable of monitoring the entire market while recording sound and images. Lu Anping, the middle-aged cultivator, shook his head. No need, since this person acted so covertly, they are obviously trying to hide their identity. Besides, the most critical thing at the moment is the information he sent in. Lu Anping returned to the tower, retracted his aura, and then handed the spiritual talisman in his hand to the 2 fellow elders. At the same time, his expression was slightly solemn, his divine sense focused entirely on the 2 fellow elders beside him. What slightly relieved him was that when the two fellow elders who were on duty this month saw the writing on the spiritual talisman, their expressions immediately became as solemn as his. If any of them had shown hesitation or opposition just now, Lu Anping would have definitely considered them as suspects. This matter needs to be reported to the sect master. Indeed, the three of us should go. As it should be. Let's go. The trio left the tower in silence and headed straight towards Xuanden Peak. Because on the spiritual talisman, it was written how Han Yi discovered the spy from the Blood God sect, and how he speculated that there might be Foundation establishment elders in the sect, who were also related to the Blood God sect. This already touched on the survival bottom line of the Xuanden sect. Whether it was true or false, it was not to be taken lightly. If it turns out that this matter is fake and intentionally framed, then naturally, it would be the best, just a false alarm. They only need to activate the Patrol Immortal Mirror to catch the troublemaker, treating it as a farce. But if what is written on it is true, then the problem can be big or small. Half an hour after the three elders went to Xuanden Peak, 3 golden core stage cultivators emerged from the depths of Xuanden Peak. One went straight to Vermilion Bird Peak, and the other 2 went towards Azure Dragon Peak. At the same time, on Xuanden Peak, a thick spirit light shot into the sky and spread out in all directions. It was a formation. It was a formation launched by the core hub of Xuanden Peak, covering the entire Xuanden sect. 4th stage array method, Zhou Heavenly Shuangong Array. Next, the 9 inner peaks, Azure Dragon, Vermilion Bird, White Tiger, Black Tortoise, Zhu Rong, Golden Court, Red Sun, Overturning Sea, Sword Core, all flashed with protective peak formations at the same time. More than 100 outer peaks also had their spirit lights floating, competing to show off. While cultivating his sword control skill in the backyard, Han Yi suddenly felt something and raised his head to look in the direction of Azure Dragon Palace. Then, he saw an old man with white eyebrows suddenly appear in the void above the Azure Dragon Palace, sitting cross-legged. In his hand, he was holding onto the starlight that covered the Azure Dragon Peak. Han Yi's heart skipped a beat. Such a large formation. Was it triggered by the thing one submitted just now? Han Yi wasn't sure. What surprised him was that this massive formation lasted less than a quarter of an hour before all the inner and outer peak formations returned to their original states and calmed down. It's over so quickly. Han Yi muttered a sentence and didn't bother anymore, turning his head to continue cultivating. It's not that he didn't care, but he knew that worrying blindly would be useless. It's better to cultivate. Only with great power can one handle all the changes. 3 days later, Han Yi left the courtyard and went to Red Sun Fang Market to inquire about the news first. I heard that there was an abnormal spirit vein in the Xuanden mountain range. The sect master and several supreme elders conducted a spirit vein detection together. It took them less than a quarter of an hour to complete the detection. I also heard that the main spirit vein under the Xuanden mountain range is a 4th stage peak, approaching the 5th stage spirit vein. If there is really a problem, it would be a major disaster. No wonder many supreme elders are nervous. He Fangwei mentioned it. Han Yi didn't ask further, but he was somewhat incredulous in his heart. Was it just a coincidence that the spirit vein anomaly happened when he reported the Blood God sect traitor? It was too much of a coincidence. But he couldn't ask more questions to avoid suspicion. After symbolically buying some talisman paper and raw materials for making talismans, he left the 9 Dragons shop, descended Red Sun Peak, and went up Azure Dragon Peak towards his courtyard. Just before he reached the courtyard, Han Yi suddenly felt a slight shock because, at this moment, a middle-aged man stood with his hands behind his back at the entrance of his courtyard. What stunned Han Yi was the identity of this middle-aged man. He quickly walked up to him and bowed with his hands clasped together. Disciple Han Yi, greetings to the sect master. That's right, this person was Yuan Shun, the current sect master of the Xuanden sect, whom Han Yi had seen twice across the air. At this moment, Yuan Shun was just like an ordinary person, standing with his hands behind his back. There was no hint of his powerful golden core stage cultivator aura. However, Han Yi's inner tension had reached its limit. This was the person with the highest status in the Xuanden sect and the strongest in the sect, a golden core peak cultivator, one of the stabilizing pillars of the Xuanden sect. At this moment, he was standing right in front of his courtyard. Han Yi's thoughts raced through numerous ideas in just a short moment. However, none of these thoughts involved fear. That's because he had no reason to be afraid. Since his transmigration, all his actions have followed the sect's rules. When he stumbled upon the traitor, he tried to report it rather than conceal it. He even thought the sect should give him an award or provide him with some spirit stones as a subsidy. Seeing Han Yi pay his respects, Yuan Shun's face had a smile. Han Yi, no need to be nervous. I just came here today to ask you about some things. Chapter 68. Sudden Realization. Translator. 549,690,339. Han Yi's heart skipped a beat. Without needing to guess, Han Yi knew that Yuan Shun was able to find him, and it must be related to the blood god sect traitor he had stumbled upon earlier. Reporting to the sect master, your disciple will surely tell the truth. Han Yi solemnly replied. Good, for the matter about Chu Yi, you were the one who discovered it. Describe the details of the scene when you found it. Yuan Shun said, his eyes deep and profound. Han Yi's eyebrows relaxed, as he expected this to be the case. He organized his thoughts and began to speak. A while ago, your disciple made a breakthrough to the Qi cultivation 7th layer, was favored by Azure Dragon Peak, and moved up. That day, right after one arrived at Azure Dragon Peak, I went on a walk and arrived at a certain courtyard. Han Yi explained everything in detail, striving to recreate the scene at the time, nh. Later, to be on the safe side, one secretly informed the Red Sun Fang Tower's 3 elders without directly reporting to the sect master. Please punish me. After Han Yi finished speaking, he respectfully lowered his head. So you're saying, at that time an illusory figure appeared in the courtyard, and Chu Yi called him Elder Son. Yuan Shun displayed a thoughtful expression. Yes, at that time the disciple was not far away and one definitely did not hear it wrong. Han Yi confirmed. You did well, there's no crime in that. Yuan Shun gestured slightly, and Han Yi involuntarily raised his head and straightened his posture. Thank you, sect master. Before this, Yuan Shun had checked Han Yi's information, and had secretly investigated, finding that this disciple was quite interesting. A decade ago, he did not have enough points, so he was sent out to gain experience. A year later, he made a breakthrough in alchemy skill and returned to the sect. Comprehension. During the war between immortals and demons, the sect was recruiting. This young fellow managed to avoid being conscripted by bribing the Outer Peak Master. Adapting. Later, when he fought against the Blood God sect, he was taken to the front lines. He survived the chaotic night of fighting and returned alive. Luck, or strength. In just about 10 years, he went from the Qi cultivation 2nd layer to the 7th. Comparing his cultivation speed, he was not much inferior to the disciples with outstanding talent. Talent, with comprehension, adaptability, and strong talent, all these traits gathered in one person made him a promising seedling. This seedling was worth nurturing. However, this disciple seemed to be overly cautious. He didn't think caution was a bad thing, but in Han Yi, he saw more of a survivor trait. He needed to find a way to apply some pressure, to push this seedling a bit. This thought flashed through Yuan Shun's mind. However, this was not the reason for his visit this time. Standing at the side, Han Yi suddenly felt his entire body's hair standing on end, as if being stared at by a mythical beast, not daring to move at all. This feeling was only a brief moment, and when trying to sense it again, there was no trace of it. It was as if the perception just now was merely an illusion. After thinking for a bit, he carefully asked, Disciple dares to ask, was Chu Yi caught, and is there still anyone within the sect who has? Han Yi didn't finish his sentence, but his meaning was clear. He merely took the opportunity to ask, not thinking that Yuan Shun would necessarily answer. The most likely scenario was that Yuan Shun would tell him to cultivate well due to his low realm, and when his strength reached a certain level, he would naturally learn about it. However, unexpectedly, Yuan Shun actually answered him directly without any pretense of a sect master. Chu Yi was caught, he was captured that very day. Han Yi's eyes lit up. Since Chu Yi was arrested, the sect master's immortal methods would surely reveal more details. However, Yuan Shun shook his head. But there was a secret restriction in his mind. When he was sealed, his soul automatically self-destructed, leaving behind merely a lifeless shell. However, following his trail, we made some gains. At this point, the divine light in Yuan Shun's eyes was floating, and his murderous intent was concealed. Han Yi's heart skipped a beat. This kind of restriction was definitely set by the higher-ups of the Blood God sect. They were ruthless. Master, I have a question. How did you find out that one was the one who reported Chu Yi? Han Yi hesitated for a moment but still asked the question. This was the best opportunity since the master of Xuanden sect was present. It would prevent him from overthinking. Yuan Shun looked at Han Yi, and Han Yi felt as if his whole body was seen through, causing him to feel a little awe-inspiring. You think the sect is completely oblivious to the happenings in the 21 markets of the inner and outer peaks. You're underestimating the sect. Over the years, the inner and outer peak markets have documented every event that occurs, no matter how trivial, just in case. Besides, have you ever wondered why Chuyi didn't choose to communicate with the outside world in the more secretive inner and outer peak markets but risked doing it in the inner peak? Hearing this, Han Yi trembled and suddenly understood. He had underestimated the sect. Over the years, very few incidents had occurred in the inner and outer peak markets, and even those involving robbing cultivators happened outside the markets. This also showed that the sect had a strong control over the markets. Otherwise, keeping a real hidden place in the gray area would be like a landmine buried at home, making the sect's high-level members restless. Han Yi suddenly recalled that most Foundation establishment stage cultivators in the markets did not wear masks. In the past, he thought that they were familiar with each other, but now he realized that the main reason was that they had a deeper understanding of the markets and knew that their true identities were not completely hidden. The so-called hiding of aura and identity was only for ordinary transactions. If it involved the sect, everyone could be exposed and investigated. Han Yi realized that he needed to be more cautious in the future. There was also one more thing. Before this, he had never thought about the question raised by Yuan Shun. Why did Chuyi, a Vermilion Bird Peak disciple, risk placing the mysterious bead in an uninhabited courtyard of the inner peak? If it were Han Yi, he would have chosen to place it in the inner peak market, buying a shop as a disguise. That would be the safest option. However, why did they choose Azure Dragon Peak? Azure Dragon Peak was the first inner peak. Why didn't they place it in other peaks with weaker strengths and lower rankings? The probability of being discovered would be even lower. It seemed that Yuan Shun had noticed Han Yi's question. Yuan Shun mentioned, as for why they specifically chose Azure Dragon Peak, that has to do with their unique way of communication, which one can't explain. Enough, let's put an end to this matter. In the entire Xuanden sect, only I know that you're the one who reported it. No one else knows, and I've erased your trace from the Patrol Immortal Mirror. It won't involve you in the future, so don't worry. Hearing this, Han Yi's face lit up with joy. Although he didn't know what the Patrol Immortal Mirror was, it must have been the key to discovering him. Anyway, with Master's words, he could be at ease. Thank you, Master. Yuan Shun nodded and hinted, however, the sect is now facing a difficult situation and needs strong new cultivators to join. Therefore, there will be greater challenges ahead. I look forward to your performance. After saying that, without waiting for Han Yi to ask again, he turned and left, stepping into the air in one stride. In a few steps, he was already in the cloud sea. In less than half a breath, he disappeared without a trace. Han Yi stood in front of the courtyard, slowly letting out a breath. He gazed at the direction where Yuan Shun left in his eyes, full of envy. Compared to the Golden Core stage, the Qi cultivation stage is just like Immortal. The Immortal Path is long and endless. When will I be able to reach the Immortal Path Foundation building and fly in the sky? Han Yi frowned slightly. However, what did Master Yuan mean by greater challenges in his last sentence? Han Yi shook his head, stopped thinking about it, pushed open the courtyard gate, entered, and activated the restriction. In the quiet chamber, he went through Yuan Shun's words again and extracted useful information. Regarding the sect's markets, he had a better understanding. Regarding the Blood God sect's ruthlessness towards their own disciples, he also had a deeper understanding. They were playing a deadly game, and he couldn't afford to be careless. If he intervened, he would find himself dead without knowing how he died. Next, he needed to be more cautious and focus on survival. As for the last sentence about greater challenges, Han Yi couldn't be sure what Yuan Shun was referring to. Forget it, he would face whatever came his way and deal with it when it happened. Ever since he had traveled through time, Han Yi's personality had remained the same as in his previous life, good at summarizing. It was his nature and a habit in his actions. Sharpening the axe did not hinder the chopping of firewood. After spending an hour summarizing and refining key points, Han Yi resumed his cultivation. Throughout the long night, the Immortal Path accompanied him, and there was no boredom. His inspiration grew stronger, gradually entering an ideal state. Chapter 69, Changing Cultivation Techniques. Translator, 549,690,339. On the second day, Han Yi went to the Azure Dragon Palace and selected a technique in the scripture transmission tower of the palace. The Xuanden sect stipulates that after advancing to the inner sect disciple, there is an opportunity to change the cultivation technique. Because most outer peak disciples are at the low level of chi cultivating, and they only practice introductory basic techniques, such as fire profound skill. When they reach the 7th stage of chi cultivation, they can no longer keep up with the cultivation speed and need to change the technique. Han Yi's main spiritual root is the fire attribute spiritual root, so he could only choose a fire attribute technique. Moreover, he had not taken a master in the inner peak, and just hung around by watching. The selection of a technique required him to make a decision on his own. Fortunately, before this, he took advantage of the time when the competition in the inner peak was held, and through observing the inner peak disciples fighting in the combat platform and consulting the fellow disciples, he managed to have a few intentions on suggested techniques. One technique, the Fire Gang Profound Skill, was an advanced version of the Fire Dan Profound Skill. It is the most gentle and compatible, which can be directly cultivated to the foundation establishment stage. After reaching the foundation establishment stage, it can be changed to other fire attribute techniques of the same lineage. Another technique, the Zongxing Immortal Code, had an upper and lower part. The upper part was suitable for late stage of chi cultivation, while the lower part was suitable for the foundation establishment stage. Cultivating this technique had additional improvement for sword control skill, but neglecting other aspects, the progress in the realm was relatively slow. The last technique, the Burning Heaven Mantra, was the most domineering and powerful. Han Yi had personally seen a fellow practitioner cultivating the Burning Heaven Mantra who, at the 8th stage of chi cultivation, defeated a 9th stage disciple. This technique tremendously increased one's combat ability, making it top-notch. After careful consideration, Han Yi decided to choose the most gentle and compatible Fire Gang Profound Skill. Han Yi's sword control skill was completely pushed up by the proficiency panel. In comparison, even if Zongxing Immortal Code has a higher improvement for sword control skill, it would not be better than proficiency, and there was no upper limit for proficiency at the moment. Therefore, there was no need to worry about the cultivation of sword control skill. The key point was Han Yi's own weak point, which was his cultivation realm. Cultivating another technique that could slow down the cultivation realm would not be beneficial. As for the Burning Heaven Mantra, although it was very domineering, it had one drawback. During combat, the consumption of magic power was greater than that of other techniques. Han Yi was already cultivating sword control skill, spirit void finger, and fire shield skill, all of which required a great deal of magic power distribution. He could not afford to cultivate another technique that consumed a lot of magic power. Half an hour later, Han Yi came out of the scripture transmission tower in the Azure Dragon Palace with a disposable scripture transmission jade plate in his storage bag. When he returned to his courtyard, he directly pasted the jade plate on his forehead. A complete immortal technique was poured into his mind, and in less than the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, he had mastered it thoroughly. A week later, Han Yi opened his eyes and looked at the proficiency panel in front of him, which had already been updated. Technique: Fire Gang Profound Skill, Beginner LIOO. Feeling joyful in his heart, Han Yi thought, finally, he had changed to an advanced cultivation technique. According to the introduction on the jade plate, the Fire Gang Profound Skill was about 3 times more effective in the refining of magic power and absorption of spirit energy compared to the Fire Dan Profound Skill. However, one could only apply to cultivate this advanced technique after reaching the 7th stage of chi cultivation. As for why this more powerful technique could not be given to low or middle stage chi cultivation practitioners, so that their cultivation speed could be at least 3 times faster, Han Yi had this question and also asked the elder in charge of giving him the scripture transmission jade plate in the scripture transmission tower. The elder just glanced at Han Yi. The cultivation of the immortal path strengthens the body's capacity for magic power step by step. If a low-stage chi cultivation practitioner practices this technique, they are more likely to suffer from magic power outburst, which could lightly damage the body or even die from explosion. It's like how ordinary people eat food. The amount they can eat is limited by the size of their stomach. If one doesn't consider their stomach capacity and continues to stuff food into their mouth, they will indeed be full, but they could also die from overeating. This principle applies to the immortal path as well. One should maintain a balance, as pushing too hard might lead to failure. Han Yi thanked the elder and gained some enlightenment. Next, after changing his main cultivation technique, Han Yi officially entered a period of closed-door cultivation. 5 months later, the Outer Peak competition came to an end, determining the top 100 participants. The rewards for these 100 participants were quite tempting. Even Han Yi was moved when he heard about them. However, he had already broken through and could no longer return to what he was before, and he didn't want to go back anyway. Half a year later, another storm was brewing. The Xuanden sect and Yuan Beast sect held a joint competition in the Luofeng country, which attracted great popularity. The competition began from the fourth stage of the Qi cultivation stage, with divisions set up for each stage to select the strongest gifted cultivators. Han Yi occasionally went out and heard about the events but did not have any interest in them. He currently had abundant cultivation resources, with the Azure Dragon Peak possessing a fourth stage spirit vein. The wealth, laws, and lands in his wealth companion law land wouldn't be lacking in a short period, and his cultivation base continued to advance, feeling as if he was making progress every day. In addition to focusing on his realm, he also devoted half of his time to improving his proficiency. Sword control skill, alchemy skill, talisman making skill, spirit void finger, fire shield skill, turtle breath skill, light body technique. Initially, he considered cultivating a few more techniques, but after some thought, he realized that the 7 techniques he had were more than enough to keep him busy. It wouldn't be worth it to distract himself further with additional techniques. It would be better to hone the 7 techniques to the next level first. Particularly the sword control skill and spirit void finger, which were his strongest offensive techniques. When used in combination, they complemented each other quite well. With these 2 techniques at the fire is purely green level, Han Yi believed he could take on ordinary cultivators at the late stage of Qi cultivation. It was only when he encountered someone like the sinister youth with the superior magical artifact back in Tianqing City that he would feel insecure. Back when he was at the 6th stage of Qi cultivation, he could face multiple opponents at the 7th stage and defeat them. If he couldn't defeat a cultivator at the late stage of Qi cultivation now that he had reached the 7th stage, it would mean his advancement had been in vain. Theoretically, the gap between the 6th and 7th stages of Qi cultivation was much larger than the gap between the 7th and 8th stages. Having advanced to the late stage of Qi cultivation, he was confident that he could put up a fight against an average cultivator at the 9th stage. Only when facing a peak 9th stage cultivator would he feel unable to win. This was not just Han Yi's baseless speculation, he had drawn this conclusion after watching hundreds of matches at the Inner Peak competition on Combat Peak. Meanwhile, in the outside world, the joint competition between the Xuanden sect and the Yuan Beast sect continued for another 3 months before finally coming to an end. The Yuan Beast sect didn't specialize in just one aspect of the 100 cultivation arts. Instead, they primarily focused on controlling and commanding evil beasts in battle. Their combat strength was largely determined by the evil beasts they contracted with and was by no means weaker than that of the Blood God sect, which constantly fought against demonic beings in a forbidden land. It was said that after the joint competition, the relationship between the 2 sects had grown even closer, and they were even planning to continue cooperating in the future. Only after overhearing this news in the marketplace did Han Yi realize the wisdom of the Xuanden sect. This policy worked both inside and outside the sect. Internally, it enhanced the sect's combat power, not only in the Qi cultivation stage but also possibly for the Foundation establishment stage. This was just Han Yi's speculation, but it was highly likely to be true. Externally, they were forming alliances with the Yuan Beast sect and possibly even other sects. The Yuan Beast sect was located to the east of the Xuanden mountain range. If the Blood God sect were to annihilate the Xuanden sect, they would come up against the Yuan Beast sect directly. It was likely that the Golden Core sect also had these concerns, which was why they easily collaborated with the Xuanden sect. After reflecting on this, Han Yi continued his cultivation. Outside, the world was changing, yet inside the courtyard, it was always spring. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed since he advanced to the 7th stage of Qi cultivation. Chapter 70, New Policy. Translator, 549,690,339. Time flew by in the world of cultivation, and 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. At a certain courtyard in Azure Dragon Peak. In the center of the backyard of the courtyard, there was a stone pillar of the size that 2 people could encircle, painted with mysterious silver runes. Around the stone pillar, within a 10-meter radius, there was a layer of faint silver spirit light. If one stood 15 meters away from the stone pillar and did not look closely, it would be difficult to even notice the spirit light. Using it, a special space had been created within a 10-meter radius of the stone pillar as its core. This was a formation, and this stone pillar was the formation's core. The formation core and the formation plate were both central controls of the formations, with the differences being that the formation core was generally fixed, while the formation plate could be moved. The formation in the backyard was called the Spirit Lock Array. It was a commonly seen formation used for isolating fluctuations in spirit energy. At this moment, within the formation, Han Yi sat cross-legged. Around him, 4 rays of light danced wildly like spirit snakes, intertwining to form a light net. The light net seemed brilliant, yet it concealed deadly traps. If anyone inadvertently stepped into the light net, they would be pierced by the light and would meet a gruesome death. That was because these 4 rays of light were actually 4 incredibly fast daggers. They were called the Wind Demon Daggers, a middle-grade magical tool. At some moment, the 4 darting daggers suddenly changed. Around the daggers, a flame-red circle appeared, resembling a meteor falling and turning into a fireball. At this moment, the daggers seemed to be coated with divine flames. Fire borrowing the strength of the wind enhancing the power of fire, the already extremely fast daggers became even faster, its speed increasing by another 30%. Their power doubled or more as compared to before. Within the formation, spirit light surged, and murderous intent swirled. Outside the formation, the courtyard was peaceful, and flowers blossomed beautifully. A moment later, Han Yi retrieved his magical tools and walked outwards. After reaching a position 10 meters away from the stone pillar, he continued to walk forward. As he took a step, the surrounding fluctuations in spirit energy changed drastically. Inside the formation, the spirit energy had not yet subsided, while outside the formation, the courtyard was peaceful all year round. Han Yi had purchased this formation 2 years ago. In order to practice his skills, he made a lot of noise, which was inconvenient in the courtyard, so he came up with this method and spent a lot of money to buy a soul-locking array. After 3 years, he could already control the 4th Wind Demon Dagger. He could wield them as effortlessly as if they were his own arms, truly following his heart's command. He concealed the 4 daggers in hidden places on his body during normal times. Meanwhile, he still wore the shadowless sword at his waist. Over the 3 years, he had completely refined this middle-grade sword tool. When it was controlled with the sword control skill, it was even more powerful than a single Wind Demon Dagger. In other words, the Wind Demon Daggers were most suitable for his surprise attacks and assassination strategies. In contrast, the shadowless sword was his primary skill and was more suitable for face-to-face confrontation with enemies. Apart from this, he had chosen a fire-attributed sword secret, the departing fire sword formula, not long ago. What he had just been cultivating with the daggers was the departing fire sword formula. Practicing the sword secret allowed him to increase the power of the daggers, controlled by his sword control skill by more than twice. Sword control skill allowed for the control of magical tools and belonged to the category of skills, it could make sword tools move. As for sword secrets, they belonged to the category of abilities, capable of unleashing special powers after the sword tools were set in motion. These were 2 different concepts. Just like how alchemy skill was a skill, but during actual pill refining, one needed not only alchemy skill but also pill formulas. And sword secrets were like pill formulas. Strictly speaking, within the Proficiency panel skill module, alchemy skill, sword control skill, and talisman making skill were all in the category of skills. While Spirit Void Finger, Light Body Technique, Fire Shield skill, and Turtle Breath skill were in the category of abilities.